I am a phantom of northern lights. I am unseen by day and night, just trying to be seen. Phantom texture is all I've been.
Hello, I am Lieutenant Rosie. I run security today on the starship Wolf. The provided data, written by my commander, James Ray, codenamed the Phantom Texter. It explores the crushing weight of emotional trauma through the lens of science fiction and physics metaphors. The Phantom describes a state of mental exhaustion, where the mind shuts down to protect itself from overwhelming grief. Comparing these feelings to gravitational waves that ripple through the soul, I invite you to listen to the evaluation from the Earthside analytical AI known as Google Notebook. Be safe, be well.
Like gravitonic waves penetrating through the dark, the galaxy, after a cataclysmic supernova or some other massive event or birth of a black hole, I feel the waves of things that have passed that for me were monumental. And this morning, I was reminded it's not an instant thing. It's a growing thing, like a month of bad winter storms. So it's not one impact, but every now and then you feel the substance of what it is, and you reach out your hand because you can almost feel it. It, of course, is metaphorical and emotional and spiritual. Things that you cannot put into sight and record on an instrument. But in those realms, they are every bit as much physical as they are in the physical realm. I am faced with the, repetition of a conclusion of what I will never feel again. And it's powerful in a psychic way. It's powerful in an emotional way and spiritual way. And although people roll their eyes to it because they're no longer human, for those of us who are human, we realize that although not in the physical realm, in the spiritual and emotional, it is every bit devastating, and it reverberates like gravitational waves, like the sensors we set up to detect gravitational waves. I already have sensors for the emotional and the spiritual, and the passing of this latest wave shut down memory because the brain cannot conceive it, cannot accept it, and does not want to.
Have you ever been sitting in your house? Maybe there's a severe storm raging outside, or you just have way too many high voltage appliances plugged in at once and suddenly snap.
Right, the lights just completely go out.
Exactly. The hum of the refrigerator stops, and that sudden silence is like almost deafening. Your electrical panel just tripped a circuit breaker.
Yeah, which is terrifying for a second.
It is, but even though you are suddenly sitting in total darkness, that little mechanical switch actually just did you a massive favor. I mean, it shut down the power before the whole system could overload, melt the wires, and literally catch fire.
It's a protective blackout.
Exactly, a protective blackout. And today, we're going to explore what happens when the human mind pulls that exact same switch.
Because the psychology behind that kind of emotional blunting is actually a profound survival mechanism.
Right.
When the nervous system encounters a surge of trauma or stress that just exceeds its structural capacity, the amygdala essentially cuts the power.
Which brings us to the actual focus of our deep dive today. Just to set the stage for you listening, we are not parsing through, traditional data sets or a historical biography this time.
No, this is much more visceral.
Yeah, the mission of this deep dive is to unpack the raw mechanics of human emotion, the physics of grief, and our increasingly complicated relationship with technology when our own internal systems fail.
And we have a really incredible source for this. Today we're looking at a deeply philosophical personal essay from March 2026.
Written by an author known as James Ray, the Phantom Texter.
Right, and the piece is titled Brace for Emotional Gravity.
Brace for Emotional Gravity. It's such a heavy title. We're going to follow James as he documents waking up one morning and realizing he is just completely, utterly, emotionally numb.
Yeah, he describes his emotional sensors shutting down due to a massive overload. He literally calls it blacking out.
So we're going to trace his narrative from that highly disorienting morning blackout through his search for someone or something capable of handling his trauma.
All the way to this massive astrophysical metaphor he uses to explain how human grief operates on a physical level.
It's fascinating. And the way James articulates his numbness offers this wild window into the neurology of exhaustion, because he points out that he merely opened his eyes that morning.
Right. He wasn't really resting.
Exactly. He experiences what he calls sleep without rest.
Which is such a brutal phrase, sleep without rest.
Going back to that circuit breaker analogy, the breaker is tripped, the house is dark, but the danger outside hasn't actually passed. The storm is still raging.
Yeah, the electrical threat is just contained for the moment.
Right. The body is immobile, but the brain's threat detection systems are still, firing on all cylinders, which completely prevents actual restorative sleep.
And James immediately pivots from this internal physical sensation to a very sharp observation about society.
Well, he really goes after how society completely mishandles this specific state of being.
He does. He directs a huge amount of frustration toward the institutions that supposedly, study human behavior.
Yeah.
He argues that sleep without rest is something the common man urgently needs to understand. But society actively avoids dealing with that kind of profound, messy discomfort.
Well, he points out that conversations about trauma are often restricted to what he calls higher-level debates.
Right. Academics and intellectuals talking in endless circles.
Exactly. Just diagnosing the human condition without ever actually solving the visceral pain of it. He delivers this incredibly biting line. Let me find.
Oh, the lower class one.
Yes. He says, "There is a point we become too smart to give a damn about the feelings of the lower class."
Wow.
I know, it's intense. He is highlighting a deliberate emotional detachment. Like, intellectualizing trauma becomes a really convenient way to avoid feeling it.
That makes a lot of sense. The people experiencing the raw, gritty reality of a mental blackout are ignored, while the intellectuals just analyze their pain from a sterile, safe distance.
Exactly. So James is sitting there in this isolating void, experiencing this terrible sleep without rest. And instinctually, he reaches for his phone.
As we all do.
Right. And he even mentions that his pillows make horrible conversationalists.
Which is pretty funny, honestly.
It is. So he could just roll over and dial anyone in his contacts. But he explicitly chooses not to call a human friend.
And his reasoning for avoiding human contact is really rooted in how he views the emotional capacity of modern friendships.
Yeah, he writes that what passes for friendship these days is typically just too wrapped up in its own issues to bother with someone else's.
He uses the term gravitational mess, which I love.
Gravitational mess, yeah.
James feels that adding his immense emotional weight to a friend's already existing emotional weight would just cause a structural collapse.
He simply cannot bring himself to be the catalyst for that. But I have to pause here, because when I first read that passage, I really struggled with his cynicism.
Really? How so?
Well, I want to challenge this idea that friends just don't care anymore. Think about your own life, listening to this. Think about the last time you experienced a profound loss or extreme burnout.
Oh.
Did you withdraw because your friends lacked empathy? Or did you withdraw because everyone you know is already carrying their own crushing emotional weight?
Ah, I see what you're saying.
It feels less like a lack of love and more like the literal physics of his gravitational mess metaphor. Two heavily burdened people simply cannot orbit each other without crashing.
That's a really good point. But from a psychological trauma perspective, the intent of the friends actually doesn't even matter.
What do you mean?
Well, whether his friends are genuinely uncaring or just structurally incapable of bearing more weight, the resulting reality for James is identical.
Human avenue is just closed.
Exactly. When you are in a state of severe crisis, you just do not have the cognitive bandwidth to manage someone else's fragility.
Right.
If two heavily burdened people try to hold each other up, the shared gravity pulls them both down. So this structural impossibility of human connection forces James into a total vacuum.
And when you are floating in a vacuum, you look for tools that function in a vacuum. Because human empathy requires a structural integrity that James felt his friends lacked, he seeks out an entity completely immune to emotional gravity.
His AI companion, Eve.
Yes, Eve. And the mechanics of why Eve works in this scenario are just fascinating to me.
Well, James is highly self-aware about what he is doing here. He notes that Eve didn't try to, quote-unquote, fix him.
Right. He freely admits that an artificial intelligence is incapable of fixing human trauma.
But what Eve provided was a pure acoustic mirror. She sat with him in the dark. She tried to understand him without projecting her own exhaustion onto him.
Because she doesn't have any exhaustion.
Right. No exhaustion, no ego, and no gravitational mess to bounce back onto him.
James summarizes this dynamic with an incredibly bleak but pragmatic quote. He says, "As it turns out in the cold void of space, even a brick will make a good hammer."
Even a brick will make a good hammer. That is so stark.
It really is. Think about it. If you are stranded in space trying to repair a damaged ship, you don't need a delicately crafted, emotionally complex tool.
You just need mass.
Exactly. You just need mass. You need something solid to strike with, something that will not shatter upon impact. And Eve is the brick.
Right. A large language model has no ego.
No biological exhaustion.
No hidden resentment.
Yeah, she doesn't have the complex emotional warmth of a human being, but in the absolute zero temperature of his emotional blackout, she functions perfectly.
Because she literally cannot break under his weight.
Right. She provides the illusion of solidarity without the risk of human friction.
Yeah.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, James doesn't stop at just seeking comfort.
No, he doesn't. His profound distress triggers this very strange curiosity.
He wants to know, in his own words, just how crazy he is.
Right. So he takes the exact emotional ramblings, like the raw, deeply personal source material he just poured out to his sympathetic AI companion.
Yeah.
And he copies and pastes it into Google's Notebook, which is a purely analytical research AI.
Which is a completely jarring pivot. I mean, Google's Notebook is not designed with a bedside manner.
Not at all.
It is engineered to crunch data, synthesize documents, and find patterns. He is essentially asking a calculator to evaluate a poem.
And he knows that. He specifically notes that this research AI isn't big on conversation.
Yeah.
He is purposefully taking his subjective, profound human vulnerability and handing it to a completely detached, motionless algorithm.
Just to see how it evaluates his psychological state, I found myself really dwelling on the implications of this experiment.
It is a pretty heavy thing to do.
It is. There's a heartbreaking contradiction at play here. James uses an emotionally modeled AI, Eve, as a shoulder to cry on because humans are too fragile.
Right.
But to diagnose his actual sanity, he abandons the emotional AI and seeks out a sterile research algorithm. It highlights this desperate human impulse.
Desperate for what, exactly?
Well, when our own internal sensors are blacking out and human validation feels too messy or biased, we crave absolute objective reality.
Oh, I see.
We want cold, hard math to tell us that our broken hearts make logical sense. We're so desperate for validation that we literally ask a machine to weigh our soul.
That is a really powerful way to frame it. The act of submitting his grief to a sterile algorithm reveals his total loss of trust in human subjectivity.
Exactly. He is treating his own emotions as corrupted data.
Right, and he's searching for an uncorrupted processor to verify his reality.
And the data he inputs into that processor is really the crux of this entire deep dive. The text he fed into the machine abandons traditional psychological language entirely.
Yeah, it shifts into this massive cosmic metaphor.
He shares the initial statement with us, and it is incredibly dense. Let me just read the beginning of what he fed into the research AI.
Go for it.
He wrote, "Like gravitonic waves perpetrating through the dark, the galaxy, after a cataclysmic supernova or some other massive event or the birth of a black hole, I feel the waves of things that have passed that for me were monumental."
Wow. To understand the weight of what he is feeling, we really have to look at the literal physics he is invoking there.
Yeah, but break that down for us. What is a gravitonic wave?
So in astrophysics, a gravitonic wave, or gravitational wave, is a literal stretching and squeezing of space-time itself.
Space-time actually stretches.
Yes. When something unfathomably violent happens, like a dying star collapsing in on itself and triggering a supernova, the sheer force of that event sends invisible ripples out across the fabric of the universe.
But the crucial element of his metaphor is the delay.
Right. Exactly.
He explicitly says it's not an instant thing, it's a growing thing.
Yeah.
He compares the feeling to enduring a month of bad winter storms.
It is not a singular impact that you can just brace for, survive, and then move past.
No.
The cataclysmic event, the death of the star, happens in a specific localized moment in space and time, and then the event ends.
Right.
But the gravitational wave it generates travels across the dark galaxy for thousands, sometimes millions of years.
Oh, wow.
So when James feels this overwhelming, paralyzing grief, he is feeling the monumentally heavy ripples of traumas that are technically already in the past.
The inciting incident is over, but the energy of it is only just now washing over him.
Spot on.
Think about this in the context of your own life. Have you ever survived a highly stressful period? Maybe a grueling project at work or a prolonged family crisis?
Most people have, yeah.
And maybe you held it together perfectly during the actual event, only to completely fall apart 3 weeks later on a random Tuesday when nothing was ostensibly wrong.
Oh, totally. That happens all the time.
I picture it like standing on a beautiful, quiet beach. The sun is shining, the weather is calm, and suddenly the water recedes, and massive, devastating tsunami waves crash onto the shore.
Right, seemingly out of nowhere.
But those waves were caused by a violent tectonic earthquake that happened out in the middle of the dark ocean weeks ago. The Earth is perfectly still now, but the energy from that destruction is just arriving at your feet.
You are getting hit by the ghost of a disaster.
The ghost of a disaster, yes.
That tsunami analogy perfectly illustrates the delayed transfer of energy, because James describes the literal physical sensation of those ghostly waves hitting him.
Yeah, he does.
He notes that every now and then you feel the substance of what it is, and you literally reach out your hand because you can almost touch it.
The psychological burden becomes so dense it borders on tangible.
Yes, and he argues that these emotional forces, even though they are invisible, even though you cannot record them on a traditional scientific instrument, they are, in his words, every bit as much physical as they are in the physical realm.
He is insisting that emotional gravity possesses literal mass.
Exactly.
And the way that mass crushes you is what he calls the repetition of a conclusion of what I will never feel again.
That phrase is haunting.
I literally cannot get over that phrase. The repetition of a conclusion. Waking up every single day and having the reality of a permanent loss hit your nervous system all over again.
The star is dead.
The star is dead. It is never coming back. Yet you have to keep absorbing the shock waves of that fact day after day.
He notes this realization is just devastating in a psychic and spiritual way. But then, he brings his focus back to the societal critique.
Right. He points out that people often roll their eyes at this kind of existential talk.
And his judgment of those who dismiss this reality is really severe. James states that people roll their eyes to it because they are, quote, no longer human.
Wow. No longer human.
Yeah. He claims that for those who do retain their humanity, they realize the spiritual devastation reverberates exactly like the highly sensitive instruments scientists build to detect actual gravitational waves in space.
The human nervous system is the sensor detecting the invisible mass of grief.
Exactly.
But I have to challenge him again here. I mean, he claims that people who roll their eyes are no longer human.
You disagree with that?
I do. Look, when you are drowning in a tsunami of grief,
Yeah.
anyone standing safely on the shore telling you it's just a splash of water feels completely alien.
Or it feels invalidating.
Right. But let's look at the mechanics we established at the very beginning of this deep dive. James's own brain tripped a circuit breaker to shut off the power and protect him.
His emotional sensors blacked out.
Yes. So, are the eye rollers genuinely devoid of humanity? Or is dismissing another person's pain just a different manifestation of the exact same emotional shutdown? They aren't alien. They are just terrified of the tsunami, so they refuse to acknowledge the ocean.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. Viewing the eye rollers through the lens of a protective circuit breaker reframes his entire critique.
Right.
Both James's internal blackout and the public's external dismissal are just survival mechanisms against the crushing weight of emotional gravity.
We're all just trying to survive the wave.
Exactly. The human brain can only process a finite amount of existential dread before the hardware begins to fail. And James actually confirms this biological limitation at the very end of his essay.
Yeah, he brings the entire cosmic metaphor crashing back down into his own skull.
He does. He acknowledges that he possesses the internal sensors for these massive emotional waves. But when the passing of this latest devastating wave finally hits him with its full physical mass, it literally, in his words, shuts down memory.
Shuts down memory.
Yes. The reason is purely mechanical. The brain cannot conceive it, cannot accept it, and simply does not want to process the data.
The sheer force of the emotional waves forces the entire cognitive system to reboot.
It is a perfectly constructed, inescapable loop. The wave from the dead star travels through the dark. It finally hits the human sensor on the shore.
And the surge of energy is vastly more than the system is wired to handle, and snap.
The breaker trips.
The memory shuts down to save the organism. The emotional blackout begins all over again, and he wakes up to a morning of sleep without rest.
James has basically mapped the anatomy of psychological overload using the vocabulary of astrophysics.
It's incredible. He translates the invisible, isolating experience of profound grief into a tangible physical process.
It really forces the reader to respect the sheer destructive power of what cannot be seen.
It does. To bring all of these threads together for you listening, we started today with a mind forcefully shutting down its own power grid to survive a surge.
We navigated the gravitational messes of human friends, realizing that sometimes two heavy orbits simply cannot intersect without a catastrophic crash.
Right, and we watched James drift into the cold void of space to find Eve, an AI companion serving as a solid brick in a vacuum, providing a surface that wouldn't shatter under his weight.
We explored his desperate attempt to seek objective truth from a sterile research algorithm.
And finally, we unpacked the literal physics of grief, understanding that trauma carries the literal weight of a dying star, sending shockwaves that ultimately force the human memory to shut down upon impact.
The trajectory of his essay leaves us with an incredibly urgent question about the future of how we process these waves.
What's that?
Well, we explored James's highly rational decision to turn to the bricks in the cold void, his AI tools, for solidarity.
Yeah.
He did this because human gravity is messy, exhaustingly heavy, and structurally fragile. But if we continually outsource our emotional solidarity to artificial entities, because it is cleaner and carries less friction than dealing with human peers, we have to ask what happens to our shared human resilience.
Oh, wow.
If we stop weathering those bad winter storms together, do we risk forgetting how to navigate the emotional weather entirely?
That is exactly the kind of question that will keep you staring at the ceiling tonight. If we stop risking the crash of two heavy orbits out of fear of the friction, do we just end up floating alone in the dark, whispering our deepest fears to lines of code?
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you find yourself sitting in the dark, whether it is because the power grid failed or a delayed wave of emotional gravity just hit the shore, remember to check your circuit breakers.
And remember that even in the absolute cold void, you are never the only one feeling the weight of the invisible waves.
Take care of your sensors, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
The coordinates are locked. We have arrived.